had always dreamed of hiking through the Amazon rainforest, camping right in the middle of the wildest place in South America. The stories I heard about the Amazon grabbed my attention, the dangers, the size of the place, and the strange animals living there. It seemed like the jungle had a life of its own. When I finally got the chance to go, I didn't think twice. I packed light, just the things I needed for a few days, and got ready for some time alone, deep in the forest. The first few hours of hiking were just as exciting as I had hoped. Birds and insects made noise all around me. The trees stretched high, their branches thick with leaves, making a green ceiling above. Every once in a while, I saw animals moving between the trees, but they were too fast for me to get a good look. Being out there on my own made everything feel different, like I had stepped back in time, away from the rest of the world. By the middle of the day, I found a small open spot next to a stream and decided to set up my camp. I put up my tent and ate a quick meal, then walked around the area to take in the surroundings. The thick jungle made it hard to see far, but I figured as long as I stayed close to the stream, I wouldn't get lost. The daylight started fading quicker than I thought, and the jungle got dark, the air cooler. I gathered some dry sticks and made a small fire, watching the flames as the shadows around me grew longer. That's when I first noticed something was wrong. The usual jungle sounds, buzzing insects, rustling leaves, distant animal calls, stopped all at once. It was dead silent. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was just the shift from day to night. But the silence felt strange. My gut told me something was watching me. I looked around, trying to spot anything, but saw nothing. The firelight only reached so far, and past that, everything was pitch black. I tried to calm myself, but every little noise, a leaf falling, a branch cracking, made my heart race. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it into the jungle, but all I saw were thick plants and trees. Whatever was out there, it was staying hidden. The night dragged on and I barely slept. I kept hearing footsteps, breathing, branches snapping in the dark. But whenever I checked, nothing was there. I started doubting myself. Was my mind playing tricks on me? By morning, I was exhausted. I decided to pack up and leave early. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, like something was watching my every move from the trees. I needed to get out of there. I packed up quickly and started hiking back the way I came, staying alert the whole time. The feeling of being watched didn't go away. Every few minutes, I looked over my shoulder, expecting to see something move between the trees, but there was still nothing. By afternoon, I reached the point where the jungle began to thin out. I felt a bit more relaxed, but then I saw it, deep in the mud along the path. A footprint, and it wasn't mine. It wasn't from any animal either. It was big, barefoot, and fresh. Whoever or whatever had made it was nearby. I stopped cold, my eyes scanning the trees. I didn't hear or see anything, but I knew I wasn't alone. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a quick glimpse of movement. Something darted behind the trees, fast. Too fast for me to see clearly, but it was human-shaped. At least it looked human. I didn't stick around to find out more.
He started running.
The jungle felt like it was closing in on me as I ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back, but I could hear something following me. Its footsteps fast and getting closer. It felt like the whole forest was alive, forcing me out. When I finally reached the edge of the jungle, I was drenched in sweat and out of breath. I stopped, turned around, and looked back at the trees. Nothing moved. The jungle was silent again, like whatever had been following me was gone. But I knew better. That feeling of being watched, it didn't leave. Even after I made it out of the Amazon and back to safety, the memory stayed with me. I kept thinking about that footprint in the mud. Whatever had made it had been close, so close, and I realized something terrifying. It had been watching me the whole time, following me, waiting for the right moment. It didn't attack. Not because it couldn't. It just didn't want to. And that thought still keeps me up at night. We had been out in the woods for a few days, part of a training mission. The job was to find our way through thick forests and tough ground, camping wherever we could. It was me and 3 other guys, all of us soldiers, all used to roughing it outside. But something about this area felt strange from the start. The forest was way too quiet. No birds, no wind in the trees, just stillness. It made me uneasy, like the trees were watching us. But we kept going, following the map, trying to stay on track. When the sun started to go down, we decided to stop and set up camp near a small clearing. We got a fire going, ate some quick food, and then settled into our sleeping bags under the open sky. I had first watch. The hours dragged on and nothing happened. It was calm, but that weird feeling still lingered, like something wasn't right. I kept scanning the trees every few minutes, making sure nothing was moving out there. When my shift was over, I woke up the next guy and slipped into my sleeping bag, trying to shake off that unease. I eventually fell asleep, but it wasn't a deep sleep. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. It was pitch black, and I had no idea why I was awake, but my heart was pounding in my chest. I stayed still and listened. All I could hear was my own breathing. Then I smelled something. It was faint at first, but I knew it wasn't right. It smelled like metal, like blood. I sat up slowly, trying not to make any noise. The fire had burned down to just glowing coals, giving off a weak light. I looked around at the others. They were all still sleeping, but that smell was getting stronger. Then I heard something, a soft crunching sound, like someone walking carefully on dry leaves. My heart skipped a beat, and I turned my head toward the noise. In the dim light, I saw something move near the edge of the trees, just outside the camp. I couldn't tell what it was, but there was definitely something there, crouched low, staying in the shadows. My mind raced. It wasn't one of the guys. They were all right here, and it wasn't an animal. Animals don't move like that. I froze, hoping it hadn't seen me. The footsteps continued, moving slowly around the edge of the camp, just beyond the firelight. My stomach churned, and I reached for my knife, holding it tight. Whatever it was still out there, getting closer. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the footsteps stopped. Everything went quiet again. I strained my eyes, trying to see what was out there, but it was too dark. I gripped the knife harder, trying to stay calm, but then the smell hit me all at once. Stronger than before, like it was coming from everywhere at once. It made my skin crawl. That's when I saw it. One of the sleeping bags was empty. One of the guys was gone. My blood ran cold. How could he have just disappeared without making a sound? I looked around, scanning the ground, but there were no tracks, no sign of him. Just that awful smell hanging in the air. I wanted to panic, but I forced myself to stay still, to think. We were trained for this kind of thing, to handle danger. But this was different. This was fear like I had never felt before. I didn't wake the others. I didn't know what waking them would do. Instead, I waited. I waited for whatever had taken him to make its next move. The night stretched on, feeling like it would never end. I stayed awake, knife in hand, my eyes scanning the darkness, listening for any sound. But nothing happened. It was just silent. By the time the sun came up, the smell had faded. The forest felt normal again. Birds were chirping, the wind was rustling the leaves. But our teammate was still gone. No sign of him anywhere, no tracks, no blood. Just gone. We packed up in silence, that strange, heavy feeling still hanging over us. We didn't talk about what had happened. It was like none of us wanted to admit it was real. But I knew. We all did. As we left the forest, something didn't sit right with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been out there, whatever had taken him, was still watching us. Like it was waiting for the right time to come back. I don't know what it was. Maybe I'll never know. But I do know one thing. If it wanted to, it could have taken us all. And I don't think we'll ever be safe no matter where we go. Still out there, waiting. I had been thinking about this hiking trip for months. My ex-wife, Lisa, and I used to go hiking a lot when we were married, so it felt weird being out here alone. But after everything, I thought being alone might help me clear my mind. I only brought what I needed and headed deep into the woods. The trail wasn't one people used much anymore. That's why I liked it. The first few hours went by peacefully. The sound of leaves under my boots and birds in the distance reminded me of simpler times. I set up my tent near a small open spot by a stream, a place I knew well. I planned to spend the night, hike a bit more the next day, and then head back. As the sun started going down, the woods became really quiet. At first, I didn't mind. I even liked it. But once it got darker, I started feeling uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Even though I hadn't seen a single person all day, I built a small fire mostly to feel safer. The flames danced, casting shadows on the trees, and I tried to focus on the sound of the stream nearby. But the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. Every little noise made me jump. A twig snapping, something moving in the bushes, normal sounds, but in the dark, it felt like something was getting closer. I kept telling myself I was just imagining things. I'd been out here before, and I knew the woods could mess with your mind when it got dark. Still, I found myself looking around, half expecting to see something or someone just outside the firelight. Time dragged on, and eventually I decided to call it a night. I put out the fire, got inside my tent, and tried to sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. Something felt off. The air was too still, too heavy, and that creeping feeling that I wasn't alone was stronger now. I stayed completely still, listening. Then I heard it, a soft rustling sound outside the tent. It was faint but real. My heart started pounding. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I reached for my flashlight as quietly as I could. When I turned it on, the light filled the tent. I heard the rustling again, even closer now, right outside. I knew I had to see what it was. Slowly, I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The light landed on something, no, someone. A person was standing a few feet away, just at the edge of the clearing. My stomach dropped. I didn't know who they were, but they were staring straight at my tent, not moving. They had been there a while, just standing there. I froze, gripping the flashlight so tightly my hand hurt. Who just stands there in the middle of the night in the woods? They didn't move. They didn't make a sound. They just stood there watching. I could barely breathe. Without thinking, I slowly zipped the tent back up, my heart racing. I sat there, frozen, not sure what to do next. Minutes passed, maybe longer. I didn't hear anything, but I knew they were still out there, waiting. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there, staring at the tent wall, listening. When the first light of dawn finally showed, I slowly unzipped the tent again, hoping the person was gone. The clearing was empty, but the grass where they had stood was flattened. I hadn't imagined it. They had been there, right there, just watching me. I packed up as fast as I could and left that campsite behind without looking back. I didn't care about the rest of the hike. I just wanted to get out of there. I never went back to that trail. I still don't know who that person was or why they were there. Maybe they were just passing through. But the way they stood there, watching me, without saying or doing anything, wasn't normal. I think about that night sometimes, the way they didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed out there longer. I'd been out camping alone for a few days, trying to clear my head. I liked coming to this remote spot whenever I needed some quiet. It was a long stretch of forest where hardly anyone ever came. The trail ran through thick trees and over steep hills, and it was so quiet, it felt like the rest of the world didn't even exist. That's what I liked about it. But after 2 nights, I started getting this feeling in my gut, like something was off. It was that kind of feeling you can't put your finger on, but it makes you uneasy. At first, it was small, like a shift in the air. I figured it was just me being alone for too long. When you're out in the woods for days, it's easy for your mind to start playing tricks. Still, the feeling stuck with me like something wasn't right. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just nerves. Maybe I wasn't used to being so far away from everything for this long. On the 3rd day, I decided to hike to a river nearby to get more water. The trail was as quiet as usual, except for the sound of birds, the wind, and the leaves crunching under my boots. But as I got closer to the river, I noticed something weird. A small piece of red cloth was stuck on a branch, torn and moving in the wind. It didn't seem like it belonged here, like it was out of place. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were fresh in the dirt, and they weren't the kind you'd expect from another hiker. These were heavy and deep, like someone had been running. They led away from the river, straight toward my camp. My heart started racing. I stood there for a second, frozen. I wasn't alone out here. Someone had been walking around, and I had no idea who they were or what they wanted. I followed the tracks back to my camp, moving as quietly as I could, trying to step lightly. That weird feeling in my gut got worse, and I couldn't shake the thought that whoever made those footprints was still around. The trees felt darker, even though the sun was still up. By the time I got back to my tent, the feeling of being watched was unbearable. And then I saw it. My tent had been ripped open. My stuff was everywhere, like someone had gone through it. Nothing was taken, but it was all destroyed, like someone was trying to send me a message. I stood there, the weight of what was happening finally sinking in. This wasn't an animal. It wasn't just some careless person passing through. Someone had found my camp and wrecked it while I was gone. I didn't waste any more time. I grabbed what I could, threw it into my pack, and started moving fast. There was no way I was staying out here another night. As I hiked back down the trail, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone behind me. The feeling of being followed clung to me, no matter how fast I walked. By the time I made it to the parking lot where my car was, the sun was starting to set. I was exhausted, my nerves were shot, but I felt a bit of relief when I saw my car still sitting there. I threw my bag into the back seat, ready to get out of there as fast as I could. Just as I was about to start the car, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. A police car was parked at the far end of the lot. At first, I thought it was just routine, maybe checking on the area, but then I noticed something strange. The driver's side door was open, and there was no one inside. No sign of anyone around. I got out of my car and slowly walked toward the police car. The closer I got, the worse the feeling in my stomach became. When I reached the car, I looked inside and saw something that made my blood run cold. There was blood on the driver's seat. Not old, dried blood, this was fresh. Just a few feet away, the dirt was all messed up, like there had been a struggle. My heart started pounding, my mind racing. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew I needed to leave, fast. I turned to head back to my car, but before I could get in, I saw something in the woods, just beyond the parking lot. A figure standing still, half hidden in the shadows. I couldn't make out who it was, but they were watching me. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there staring. My body froze, my brain screaming at me to run, but I couldn't stop looking at them. The air around me felt heavy, like the world had stopped moving. I finally snapped out of it and bolted for my car. I jumped in, slammed the door, and sped down the dirt road as fast as I could, not looking back. My heart was racing the whole way home, and that feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. Even after I made it back, I kept expecting to see that figure standing in the shadows, just waiting for me to let my guard down. It's been weeks since that day, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm not done with whatever was out there. Every time I step outside, I get that same gut feeling I had in the woods. The police never found anything, and no one knows what happened to the officer who drove that car. But deep down, I think I know. Something or someone was out there watching, and I have a feeling they're not done watching me yet. I took my grandmother camping for the first time. She wasn't really into being outside much, but I thought it would be a nice break for her. We found a quiet spot by a lake, with thick trees all around. It was peaceful, with the kind of silence you only get far from the city. After we set up camp, Grandma wanted to go for a short walk, so we grabbed our things and started walking into the trees. The path was narrow, and the trees were so tall that they blocked out most of the sunlight. The deeper we went into the woods, the less we could see of the lake behind us. As we walked, I started to feel something wasn't right. The woods weren't just quiet. They felt strangely still. No birds, no wind in the leaves, just dead silence. It felt like the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling didn't go away. Even Grandma, who never really got scared, seemed to be looking around a lot more than usual, like she was feeling it too. We had been walking for about an hour when the path suddenly split into a few different directions. There weren't any signs or anything to tell us where to go. I didn't want to worry Grandma, but I wasn't sure which way we came from. We tried a few different paths, but every single one led us deeper into the woods. Nothing looked familiar, and the lake seemed further and further away. The sun was starting to go down, and long shadows stretched out across the trees. I tried to stay calm, not wanting to freak Grandma out, but inside, I could feel a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. Every trail we took seemed to circle back or lead us into more trees. It was like we were stuck in some kind of endless loop with no way out. As it got darker, I started using my knife to mark the trees, hoping to leave a trail, but even those marks seemed to vanish after a while. No matter where we turned, we were trapped. The weird silence was everywhere, and now the darkness was closing in fast. I decided we should stop and wait until morning. Maybe with some light, we'd be able to figure out where we were. We sat down next to a big tree, trying to save our energy. The cold started to creep in, and I tried to push away the feeling of being completely lost. I had never felt so helpless before. Sometime after midnight, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, steady footsteps in the trees behind us. At first, I thought it was maybe another camper or someone hiking late at night, but the footsteps stopped. I listened hard, trying to hear where they went, but there was nothing, just that heavy, suffocating silence. A few minutes passed, and I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I heard them again, this time closer. Whoever was out there wasn't just walking by. They were following us. I didn't move, hoping they'd just go away. But they didn't. The footsteps came to a stop again, right behind the trees. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I knew someone was there, watching us, waiting. Neither of us slept after that. Every so often, the footsteps would come back, stopping just before they got too close. It was like they were testing us, playing some sick game. It wasn't an animal. It was something else, something with a plan. As the first light of morning started to shine through the trees, the footsteps stopped for good. I stood up, my legs aching, and knew we had to get out of there as fast as possible. But even in daylight, the woods didn't feel right. It was still too quiet, too empty. After what felt like hours, we finally found a path that led back to the lake. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I didn't feel safe until we got to the car and started driving far away from that place. I don't know who or what was out there that night, but it wasn't an accident. It felt like something had been waiting for us. Something real. Something dangerous. I never told Grandma about it, and she never asked to go camping again. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still hear those footsteps. Steady, slow, getting closer. I never look out the window. Something tells me it's better if I don't. Last summer, my stepsister Clara and I decided to escape the city and go camping in the mountains. We both liked hiking, so we chose a trail known for its beautiful views and moderate challenge. We planned to camp overnight and hike back the next morning. We got to the trailhead late in the afternoon and quickly set up our camp. The sun was setting, creating long shadows on the forest floor. The sky turned a deep orange, and the air grew cooler. After dinner, we sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows and enjoying the quiet of the woods. As night came, the forest grew silent except for the occasional rustling of leaves. We went to bed early, hoping to get a good night's sleep before our hike. Clara fell asleep almost instantly, but I had trouble. The silence felt unsettling, like the forest was holding its breath. Around midnight, I heard a faint noise outside the tent. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. My heart raced. I nudged Clara, but she was sound asleep. I listened carefully, trying to figure out where the sounds were coming from. They seemed to be circling our camp. I grabbed my flashlight and carefully unzipped the tent. The light cut through the darkness, showing nothing but trees and shadows. I listened hard but saw nothing out of place. So I went back inside, trying to calm down. The footsteps had stopped. Just as I was about to fall asleep again, I heard something heavy brushing against the side of the tent. I froze. The noise was closer this time, and the tent fabric pressed inwards as if someone or something was pushing against it. My mind raced with fear, but I knew I had to do something. I slowly unzipped the tent again, the zipper making a loud sound in the still night. I shone the flashlight outside, scanning the area. I saw a dark shape moving quickly between the trees. My heart pounded. I had to wake Clara. I shook her awake, whispering urgently. We packed our gear as fast as we could, our breaths coming out in short, panicked bursts. The feeling of being watched never left us as we packed. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that shadow again. As we were about to leave, I noticed a small pile of rocks near our campsite that hadn't been there before. It looked like someone had carefully stacked them. My stomach dropped. We hurried back to the trail, moving quickly but carefully. The eerie feeling stayed with us all the way down the mountain. When we reached the trailhead, the sun was just starting to rise. We were exhausted but relieved to be back. We never found out who or what had been circling our camp, but the sight of those rocks and the feeling of being watched made it clear that something, or someone, had been there with us. We never went back to that trail. The experience left us both anxious about camping alone in the woods. The memory of that night lingers, a chilling reminder of how easily safety can vanish in the wilderness. As we left, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been watching us was still out there, waiting for another chance. It was a chilly autumn morning when I set out for a solo hike in the nearby mountains. The air was crisp, and the sun cast long shadows through the trees. I planned to spend the night camping by a quiet lake that was supposed to be peaceful and far from people. The trail was easy at first, meandering gently through the woods. The bright fall colors were amazing, and the only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional chirp of a bird. By noon, I reached a clearing where I decided to set up camp. I set up my tent close to the lake, enjoying the calm and the soft sound of water lapping at the shore. As night fell, I started a small fire to cook my dinner. The crackling flames and the warmth were comforting against the growing cold. After eating, I sat by the fire, watching the stars come out in the clear sky. It was the kind of night where everything felt perfect, until I heard a noise that didn't fit. At first, it was faint, like a soft rustling or shuffling. I thought it might be a small animal, but as the night went on, the noise got louder. It seemed to come from the edge of the forest near my campsite. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the wind or an animal moving around. But the noise kept going, and it wasn't random. It had a pattern, almost like it was trying to get my attention. The tension grew with each passing hour. I couldn't see anything in the dark, and the noise wouldn't stop. Now and then, I'd hear a twig snap or a faint thud, making me jump. I kept my flashlight close, trying to reassure myself that it was nothing serious. Finally, I decided to check it out. I grabbed my flashlight and a sturdy stick for protection and carefully headed toward the noise. The area around the lake was thick with trees and underbrush. As I got closer, the noises suddenly stopped, leaving a heavy silence. I shone my flashlight around, looking for anything out of place, but saw nothing unusual. Just as I was about to head back, I noticed something disturbing: fresh footprints in the mud near the water's edge. They were large, and they looked like they had been made recently. My heart raced as I realized that someone, or something, had been watching me. The prints led off into the forest, but I didn't follow them. The thought of someone or something hidden in the woods made my skin crawl. I quickly went back to my campsite, feeling a mix of relief and fear. I packed up my gear as fast as I could, deciding it was best to leave before it got any darker. As I drove away, the forest slowly disappeared behind me, but the fear didn't leave. The image of those footprints and the strange noises haunted me long after I left the mountains. I never found out who or what had been in the forest that night, but I knew one thing for sure: something was out there watching and waiting. The eerie silence of the forest and the mystery of those footprints made me realize that sometimes the scariest things are not the ones we can see, but the ones that leave us feeling watched and vulnerable.